If I was a character from a story, I would be Catherine Morland from Northanger Abbey, Jane Austen's Northanger Abbey. Um, and why I think that is because she grew up reading books and then had her imagination run away with her wild in situations where everyone's like, no, no, stop daydreaming, come back to the real world for a second. Um, and yet it all worked out from her daydreaming and running away with those ideas and those stories and making friends. That's how she made friends, by talking about books. And I'm like, yeah, no, I identify with her. That makes sense to me. I totally would have my imagination run away with me in an old abbey that's now some rich man's house and surrounded by mystery. Yeah, of course I'd get caught up in some daydream. So
Yeah, talk about a fertile location for just
oh yeah.
imagination. Well, today we're joined by Elizabeth Fust. She is a self-published picture book author and a freelance writer by night, and then a writer for a startup aerospace company by day. In just a minute, we're going to find out how those two play together. That's really fun. So, Elizabeth, good to have you with us. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
So, welcome to Silhouettes of the Truth. It's the show about fiction for modern Catholic authors. We talk creed, craft, and co-creation, and it's rooted in grit, grace, gods, and dragons. I'm your host, Dominic D'Souza, novel lover, all-around creative, founder of Catholic Author. We're here to inspire your faith and your fiction. So first, Elizabeth, I'd love to learn a little bit more about you. How did you start creating picture books? What is a startup aerospace, company? What do you do with it? What's your origin story?
Yeah. So my mom says I started writing when I was like 4 years old. And I still have, the piece of notebook paper with the story. It's about a bunch of mice plotting against a cat who's been menacing
mice?
them.
That's awesome. I
Yeah.
love mice.
And I was homeschooled growing up, Catholic homeschooler. So a lot of times our assignments would be submit a story to a Reading Rainbow writing contest and then 4-H contests. And eventually along the way, I realized, this isn't just homework. I actually really enjoy this. So, grew up writing and finding opportunities to write different contests, using those prompts to challenge myself. National Novel Writing Month was my first foray into novels, and I'm still
Awesome.
working that angle. And then I ended up going to Northern Michigan University in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan to study writing because I figured that is a beautiful place to be inspired to write. And I've heard a lot of other authors congregate here for the same reason. And there's a great community of writers and illustrators and artists. But that also led me into the aerospace industry, where in college I made some friends and they ended up starting a company with a mission to go collect space debris and protect outer space from all of the junk that is now flying around up there and threatening satellite communication, further exploration into space, and to ultimately probably reuse that material and build something even greater in space. So,
wow.
Yeah, I've kind of gone from being a 4-year-old fiction writer to kind of getting to build science fiction fact in space. So it's
I'm a little bit geeking out over just how cool all that sounds.
Yeah.
There was a show on Hulu that was about that. It was like fragments of an alien spaceship just smashing down, and it was like one season that was. Did you see that? Do you know what I'm talking about?
I think I've read about that. I've read about that though.
If I can remember the name, but it was so much fun. It sounds a little bit similar to what you're. Anyhow, cool. Okay, so you started with mice. Now you end up with spaceships.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so you're a freelance writer.
Yeah,
and you self-published.
Yeah, I'm self-published freelance writer. Being in Marquette, there were a lot of opportunities to write here. I worked for a museum in college, and that gave me the chance to research and write exhibits. My favorite one was called Remnants, Ghost Towns of the Upper Peninsula. So I spent a whole summer just reading about ghost towns and the history of the UP, and then that led to my first published article in the Michigan History Magazine. And from there, I started writing for the Marquette Monthly, just for fun, about shipwrecks. And there's a NASA rocket launch site that was used in the 70s in the UP. So I got to mountain bike and write about that. It's the only time I've been mountain biking. Only for a story would I do it. And along the path of that, I joined the Upper Peninsula Publishers and Authors Association, which is a great community of authors here publishers here, or people who've just lived here at some point and love it here. And through that, I went to a talk by a picture book author. I don't remember her name, but she talked about all the different paths to take. And I realized after that, I was like, you know what? I'm going to self-publish. I really want to have ownership of the entire process of building this. So I actually took a story that I wrote probably as a kid, and I zhuzhed it up a bit. I really kind of looked at it again as an adult and said, how can I make this better? And I started working on it with friends. My editor was a friend I made in high school, and she owns a non-traditional publishing company, River Shore Books. So she helped me do the editing and the layout and getting it into print. And she connected me with the illustrator, and that was it. That was the first foray into self-publishing. And then I was like, that was easy. No, it wasn't, but it felt like at the end, I was like, oh, great, I'm going to do that again. So then I did another one. And this one, I'm really sure, this one I actually did right as a kid. I entered it into the 4-H fair, probably sometime in middle school. And it's called Wooly and the Good Shepherd. And it's about a little lamb on the night of the nativity who's kind of scared. He's scared of everything. But then these angels show up and he's like, this is terrifying, but interesting and exciting. And he goes on a journey and he gets to meet the baby Jesus. And so, I wrote that when I was in middle school. And I came back to it as an adult and I said, okay, how can I make this better? How can I really give this as something that now my nephews can read? And so I did it again. And this time I worked with an illustrator that I met in college, and it gave me a chance to work with someone new. And now I have more books planned, and I'm like, I'm just going to keep working with new illustrators and making new friends, new connections. And that's kind of it.
I have so many questions. I just got to write down these questions here and find a way to dial them down. Otherwise, we're going to be here forever. But, I want to go back to some of the other things that you had said there. First, okay, you said shipwrecks and ghost towns. Okay, with shipwrecks, what's the one coolest thing that you learned about a shipwreck that maybe surprised you?
I think what surprised me were that so many of them just burned down at port. We live at Lake Superior. It is a scary place sometimes. The waves are huge. It's beautiful, wondrous, but terrifying. And there are a lot of shipwrecks, but a lot of them just they burnt down at port, the coal fired, and it just got out of hand. And those are the ones that are the easiest to visit. You can go paddleboard to them, scuba dive, snorkel, and that's specifically what the article is about. But I was kind of surprised, we have all of these, but a bunch of them, they just kind of burned down. Yeah.
Wow. I've never been scuba diving. Oh, did you end up going? Did you ever end up getting down there? And
nope.
No, okay. Just the bike riding. Okay. So for ghost towns, what was the coolest thing that surprised you about reading up on these ghost towns?
I think the coolest thing was one of the ghost towns I got to read about was the first mining town in Michigan. The first mine opened in 1784. And it was started by a fellow who escaped the massacre at the Michilimackinac Fort. And it was kind of interesting to see that history go back that far. And at the time, I was working for a company that was working on projects in the area at the dams. So I was reading about these ghost towns and then getting to see the current day industry that was still happening there with hydroelectric power in the area. So that one is my favorite. I want to go there someday, but I didn't actually get to visit it yet. Okay. But it's amazing to see the history of the UP being founded and then where it is today, and still very much living off the land and using the resources here. So it's a great adventurous place to be.
That's awesome. So now I kind of got to ask, do you have any novels cooking that involve shipwrecks, ghost towns, rockets, space debris, and what do you call it? Extreme bike riding or something? I mean, that just sounds like it has to be a novel, some sort of whodunit.
Probably shipwrecks. Yeah, I'm really into pirates right now, so I have a couple ideas for nautical ideas. But no, the novels I have in the works are actually more along the lines of one kind of ties into Jane Austen, based on the Catherine Morrill and Northanger Abbey. I'm a huge Jane Austen fan. Nice. And the other one I've been working on for a while, and this one was a National Novel Writing Month. One, too, is more of a Cinderella story, kind of a chance to go, if Cinderella actually happened in history and it was historical fiction, what would have happened? So those are always brewing if I could have time to really Well, okay, if I made the time to really go sit down with them. Yeah.
I'm curious, what was the experience of NaNoWriMo for you? How did you stick to it? How do you feel about the novel by the time you got to the end of it? What did you
Yeah.
end up doing with it?
So I am a diehard NaNoWriMo. I started, I think my first year of high school, and then I did it every year. And I loved it. It gave me a chance to really grow as a writer. By the end of it, I was proud of the product. Looking back now, they're just cringy writings of a teenager, but it was so much fun, and I learned a lot. I did it my first year of college, and it almost killed me. I realized
Wow.
it was a little hard to do with the course load, and then I didn't revisit it until the last couple of years. I did jump into it again, and that was the first time to really sit down now as a working professional and say, okay, now how do I give myself time to write? I'm set up. I no longer have to worry about interviews and setting myself up in my career. And it was a little hard, but I just I made that time for myself every day. I just said, okay, if I can just do 15 minutes, it doesn't matter about the word count, just go for 15 minutes. And it's really great. My family was very supportive. So even when, it was Thanksgiving and the family was around, they're like, yeah, you go write for a while. Just leave yourself be.
That is awesome. Good for you.
Yeah. I also discovered I can write on my phone. The typos are horrendous, but sometimes if that's the only time I have waiting at the doctor's office, then I can use that time to write. I just have to edit it more later. So,
right.
Yeah.
That is so cool. Okay, so I want to move to talking more about children's stories, because one of the things that we have with Catholic authors, we've got the we have monthly genre challenges, and usually in January the idea is to focus on children's stories. So I want to ask you about your approach to children's stories and how to think about them, how to keep them short and maybe focused, or how to define them. So we'll get into that in just a second. But with your stories, I'd love to. You mentioned that you had resurfaced some old stories and then you kind of re-edited them. And what was that experience like for you to do that?
Yeah. So my first approach was that as a kid in mass, and it's hard to pay attention, but a story came from that. You're trying to focus on the readings, but you get distracted. But if you turned that distraction over to the Lord, that something could come from it. So, I'm kind of daydreaming, but I start thinking about, they're eating loaves and the fishes, but what if a cat wants some of that fish, I bet the cat's hungry too. And that became the Hungry Kitten's Tale. So the first approach was just that, I thought about this as a kid. Other kids probably would like this. Other kids have probably thought about this too, what kid hasn't played with the nativity set and all the little animals and, the shepherds. They're literally toys, they're figurines. So there's stories there all around that kids already see. So I saw them and I knew my nephews would probably have these same stories in their heads. So I'm just going to give it to them. So taking that and really just polishing it. The one that I originally wrote for 4-H, it was pretty good. But there was a lot to develop, as an adult, I know a lot more about dialogue than I did as a middle schooler.
Right.
And I also looked for more feedback. I now have a lot of friends who are teachers themselves, who are now parents. So I go to them and I say, well, what do your kids say when you read this to them? What do they want to see? And to get to incorporate that too, to develop the story from, I first wrote as a kid. Now, as an adult, I get to have the feedback of the other parents, the teachers, and really just make it a story for everyone. And yeah, that's pretty much you're writing it for kids, but you're also writing it for yourself. So
Right. What was the at that point about incorporating kid reactions? I want to come back to that because I've been repeatedly blown away by that little observation. I'm not very good at writing children's stories or picture books, so it's fascinating to chat with somebody who really enjoys it and is obviously someone who's good at it. So I want to come back to that in a second. But the experience of working with an illustrator, what was that like? I have no idea how you manage things like word count and you said you wanted to keep going now with just different illustrators and what that can open up, and if you're self-publishing, one, what does that process look like? Two, how do you afford an illustrator? Because it seems like it's I don't know. How did you handle that, and how are you handling that?
So, working with an illustrator, the first time especially, it was a learning experience. I didn't know what to look for. And I had my friend from Rivershore Books to guide me through that. She had written her own picture book, and this was actually her same illustrator. So both she and the illustrator could kind of help me along the way.
Mm-hmm.
The illustrator was part of the main reason I wanted to self-publish, because I didn't like the idea that if I went through a traditional publishing company, they might have all the control over the pictures for my book.
I see. So
Because
the
sometimes
style and
it works. Yeah. And sometimes I've heard authors say there was nothing they could do, but they didn't feel like the picture suited their story. So I wanted it to be a collaboration. I gave my illustrators a lot of power. I said, you're the artist. I am not a visual person. I just write. I write the things. I don't draw the things.
Mm-hmm.
And it did take a lot of courage sometimes to say, that's great, but I don't like it. Change it. Could you tweak it a little bit to reflect this? Or sometimes I'd say, well, why did you choose to do that? And they'd have a really good reason. I'm like, oh, I love it now. I didn't at first, but I love it now. And it really made the book what I wanted it to be. It made it the story I wanted to tell, and not just the product of a publishing company, because who knows what that might end up being, because it's not mine. So it was hard, and there was a learning curve. And sometimes I felt like the illustrator actually did more work than I did, because I just wrote it and I sat down and it didn't seem like much work at all, And sometimes the feedback I get from them was that it was the same. It was exciting and it was fun. So, when you're doing your art for a living, is it really work? Affording it was a different story. So especially being kind of straight out of college, not a lot of resources, and not having a publishing company to back that, was to look for illustrators who are probably at the same level of their career as I am as an author. And kind of coming into it openly, that we're in the same place, we're in the same boat. How do we collaborate? Let's both do research on what our work is worth and what we can do. And we just talked about it. We had an open discussion about financially what the product was worth. And that's worked out. That's really worked out. I think everyone comes away happy with what they end up getting. Working with a new illustrator every time, I mean, I probably will go back to the illustrators because I make good friendships with all of them. But different books require different styles sometimes, because different books are different styles, different stories to tell. I have a forthcoming book that's in the works, and it's about dinosaurs, which isn't necessarily the style of The Hungry Kitten's Tale, which is very pastel and pretty and soft. I want my dinosaurs to be kind of cartoony. And I'm working with a girl right now who's a good friend back from my college days, and I love it. It is absolutely perfect for the story, but that same style wouldn't have worked for a different book. So it's exciting to see all the different styles, and every book is completely different and exciting and new, and it fits itself. That's the other thing. If I had gone to a publishing company, I probably wouldn't get to have so much experience meeting new people and collaborating. And even another book I have in the process right now, which I'm excited to talk about, it's about, I meant to look this up earlier. I think he's a vulnerable Bishop Baraga of the Upper Peninsula. He was a missionary priest here. And I am collaborating with a good friend. She's the illustrating, I'm writing it. We're going to do it in association with the Bishop Baraga Association to promote his cause for canonization and really tell his history and his impact on our area. But I came to that and I said, I want to do this for the museum. And my illustrator agreed, and she said, yep, you don't have to pay me. I want to do this for the museum.
Wow.
And then I took it to my publisher and I said, I'm going to hire you to do this project later. And she said, nope, I want to do this for you guys.
That's
so it
awesome.
also became a great collaboration of this isn't just work. This is all of us finding something greater that we want to put our talents and time to. So that's another part of just the more people I get to meet, the more projects I get to do, that everybody gets to do something that they're going to be proud of the product. It's been a fun time.
That's awesome. That is exciting. You had mentioned you wanted to talk a little more about that. Was there anything else on that project, or did you just share that? Or could you actually give us a thumbnail of Venerable Baraga?
Yep. So Bishop Baraga is from Slovenia. Yeah.
Ooh.
And I'm Am I saying that right? Sorry, now I'm nervous. But yeah, he came here and he wanted to minister to the Native Americans. This was back when Michigan, early 1800s, mid 1800s. There wasn't a lot here except for the Native Americans, and fur trading was starting to make its way into the area. And creeping up the coasts were villages and churches. But in Michigan and Wisconsin, pretty much nothing. So he came here and he was basically the only priest for everywhere around. And he had kind of come from an affluent family, a nice family. They had a mansion and he went to a boarding school and he was very well off. And he came here to the middle of a wilderness and very much in the elements, very poor. And he's known as the snowshoe priest because he would go over this wide, expansive area and he would snowshoe hundreds of miles to bring the sacraments to all the people he cared for. And he braved the elements, he braved storms. Many times was probably on the point of death in the elements, freezing to death in the storm, in little ships going down on Lake Superior. But it was always okay. He was just taking care of his flock. So he was the first bishop of the Diocese of Marquette, and he really brought Catholicism here. He helped set up villages and gardens and churches and schools and really helped build the community here at a time where everything was shifting and growing. And his impact lasts to this day. For the college students of the Upper Peninsula, we hear a lot about him. And for many of us, feeling like travelers coming to this place. Some of us are from here. Some of us are far, far away, driving through whiteout conditions to get back to classes. I think a lot of the Catholic college students probably said, hey, can you intercede for me in this snow? You're the snowshoe priest. Help me get through this. Help me travel to this place. Help me be here and minister in this place and receive all the gifts and talents that are here to receive, because he helped build such a wonderful community. So he's a really important guy for the Upper Peninsula, really.
Incredible. Excuse me. That's awesome. Wow. Well, is there a deadline or a due date for the book?
So it'll probably be this fall or next spring, sometime between there, depending on how things go. But the illustrations are coming along. They're pretty good. The text is almost final. So it's just a matter of putting it all together.
That's awesome. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about how to create a children's book, and what's your approach and how do you think about it? How do you keep it short and focused? Maybe so that you either, if it's going to be a picture book, you're allowing it to have the illustrations, or if it's just going to be a short story that just gets read aloud, Yeah. How do you tackle that? How do you handle that?
Yeah. So the first step for me is I just write it. And then the next step is, as my friends read it, they might say, this is a little too long for your age range. So you either got to expand or cut it back. And they've got really good input for me. I tend to be a little wordy. I'm not sure. I'm sure there's a problem lots of authors have. And with that feedback, the next step then is to find the illustrator and have them look at it and kind of say, where do you think, based on the images you see yourself wanting to build, the page break should be? Because they could say, I feel like this section of text would make a great illustration. Don't break it up. I think it should all go. Or be like, there's this one line, I think it needs a page of its own. And to work with them and say, some pages are going to be text heavy. Some pages, it's going to be as few words as possible, but the illustrator gets the whole spread to tell the story visually. So I like to collaborate with the illustrators on the page breaks, what they want to illustrate, going with what text. And sometimes from that process comes new text to add, or pieces to take out and say, no, you can say this just with the picture. I don't need to say it in words. So it really becomes them helping to tell the story. And since the story is usually already mostly written at that point, obviously there's changes working with the illustrator. It's kind of just in their hands for a while and just continuing to collaborate and check in with each other and developments and kind of look at the drafts and the ideas. But really, they're the experts. I let them take it away. And then once the illustrations are done, that's when I go to my editorial friend and she helps put it all together, get it to print, and that part just seems to go really fast. All of a sudden, it's just done. Now all you have to worry about is the marketing, which is a beast of its own.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But with the actual writing of the story, so the working sort of subhead for that month challenge in writing in children's stories, the idea was, what do we put it as? Something like simple tales, maybe of morality or discovering the world.
Yeah.
And that seems to, does that cover sort of the general overview of why these stories exist, or what they're kind of expected to sort of do, or why children enjoy them? What would you say to that?
I would say definitely. Every story communicates some moral. Maybe you don't have it in your head as you communicate it, at least not consciously, maybe it's subconscious. But there's always discovery there too. And I think, I don't know, as I think about it, I'm like, are there any books out there that don't communicate a moral or a discovery? And I'm thinking of, there's a picture book about Carl, a dog who babysits a baby. There's no text in the book. It's just illustrations. I'm like, I'm not sure there was a moral. I'm not sure that it communicated much, but it was fun to look at those pictures.
Yeah.
But yeah, telling a story, especially as a Catholic author, and myself having based my 2 picture books off of Bible stories, there are morals there. And my first one is about a cat at the feeding of the loaves and the fishes. So Kit the kitten is pretty much experiencing what Jesus is saying. And at the end, he sees about generosity and kind of coming together as a team to like find the loaves and the fishes. And that then leads to finding a home for himself. So there is a moral there. There is about teamwork and about generosity and about sharing and the good things that can come from that. Discovery, I definitely think my second book, it's all about being scared and kind of stepping out of your comfort zone to seek, what's beyond, what's in that manger. It's the baby Jesus. How cool is that? You were strong and brave and you discovered something amazing. So I think the best stories, picture books or, classics or whatever reading level they are communicating a moral discovery, even if they're not doing it just straightforward, screaming overtly. At your face.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
And I mean, my thought or my recommendation would be, it probably depends on the story, but not to actually try to force it. Allow the child to kind of just sort of sit in this story environment that's created where somebody experiences or learns something, and then let them just kind of, take that in and, but then there are some stories where it just makes total sense to be more of a fable. It's like there's a very clear line at the end that just captures it. That one point that you mentioned about incorporating kid reactions, I'm going to ask about that next. And then I want to come back and ask you about how you create the character, because I imagine I imagine a child's story it's a lot less complex compared to, as an 8-year-old child story, or moving into like, what do you call them? Tweens, or, the next sort of age range here. So we'll get to that in just a second. There's a book that I am privileged to get to read to my little girl every night. And we're reading through various novels and so on. And there's this one author who consistently blows me away, where she'll describe things and she'll write things. And then I'll pause to take a breath or something. She'll then ask me, well, then does this happen? Or what does she think? Or what's going on? The very next line always answers that question. And I can't believe it. It's like she knows exactly what the child wants to know next. It doesn't delay it, just gives it to them immediately.
Yeah.
First of all, what do you think about that? What does that communicate to you in terms of writing a children's story? And how do you kind of, I'm assuming you've kind of done that with your own stories, is just answering those points. Can you unpack that, and how do you operate that way with your editing process?
Yeah. Well, I would hope my stories do that, but I can't say that they do. I don't know. No one's told me. I would love to hear more about that author. I love learning from other children's authors. For me to talk to the parents and teachers of children, and now that my nephews are a little bit older, them directly, to incorporate that into a book, it's as any other advanced reader copy. You want to hear what they have to say. They say, I really love this character. I want to hear more about this character. I'm trying to think of any specific examples. I was actually editing a book for a friend, a picture book, probably more of a middle grade reader. And that one, a 10-year-old girl read it, and she had the best feedback. She caught things that former teachers and parents completely missed. She had the best feedback. So I think incorporating children into the writing process, the editing process, it's great for them. They might look back on that and say, oh, I did a cool thing. But it makes the story theirs. It brings them into the story. If I just write it myself, I'm going to start using words that I'm sure the kid understands, but they're not as exciting. They're boring adult words.
Right.
But if a child reads my story and then is talking about it, like, what did you like? To use the words they used to describe it back into the book, well, those are the words that they want the story to be told in. So, yeah.
I think that is a brilliant piece of advice. And hey, if you're watching this and you're somebody who likes writing children's stories, give this a like. All right. I think that was incredibly helpful. And I want to ask, like I said, I want to come back and ask you about creating a focused character, like creating that focused story. And I think it does come down to that point you just made about literally reading it out loud. Very briefly, this interview, it's part of the community that we're building in Catholic Author. It's a super friendly, creative community for the modern Catholic author where we give and get feedback, we share insights and works in progress, and then build a network of supportive friends. We have a teen group, and then we have an author group. And then there's a whole lot more going on every month. So come check us out and join us at catholicauthor.us. So, Elizabeth, I want to ask you about creating a focused character. And I think the point you just mentioned about if you're writing a children's story, you have to grab a couple of kids and just sit them down and just spend 15 minutes and just read it out loud to them and watch their reactions or when they zone out, I imagine. And so when you're going through that first stage and you haven't even talked to an illustrator, maybe you don't ever intend to, and you're just writing a short little story, before you kind of beta test it, what are some of the creative guardrails that you think of in just creating it? How to keep it simple, how to keep it focused? If a story is defined as a character who wants something and then does something about it, does that also apply to a children's story? And then how deep do you get into it?
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm really sure how to answer that question. I don't always think that far ahead while I'm writing it. I just kind of write it stream of consciousness, do my own little editing. And that's where, I'm not even sometimes talking to the kids myself, but even hearing the feedback from the parents who are emailing it back to me.
Gotcha.
To have them, the discussions they have with their kids about, well, why did Wooly, the little lamb, do this? Yeah, okay, I guess I got to think a little bit more about that. Or just to hear their feedback of things that kind of incorporate things like, oh yeah, this made me think of that. I was like, oh, maybe I should put that in the story then, if that made you think of it. Yeah, I guess I don't think about it that hard.
No, that's fine. I'm just curious what your process is. Some people obviously they're like, I write my whole structure down, and others are like you just said, stream of consciousness, just get it out there, and then the magic is in the revision, obviously.
Yeah,
that is cool. How well, as we start to wrap up here, how can people get in touch with you and learn about the upcoming books and maybe kind of see what you're working on or just purchase your recent books? How can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, so the best way to get in touch with me is you can find me as Elizabeth Fust Books. That's F as in Frank, U, S as in Sam, T. It's hard to hear over audio. I'm on Facebook and Instagram, and you can find my website on Wix.com, but through Facebook and Instagram too is a great way to see that. My books are available on Amazon, and if you're in Michigan, you can find them in some Catholic and Christian bookstores around the state. And yeah, that's how you can connect with me. And I'd love to hear from you. So feel free to drop me a message or talk to me about my books. And I would love to hear from you.
That is cool. Well, I'm going to put those links in the description in the show notes so people can head on over there and join you. If you were to share, and it's my favorite part of every episode, if you're to share a 1-minute message of encouragement to authors who are Catholic, not just Catholic authors writing Catholic, fiction,
Yeah.
but faith-inspired fiction. What would you want to share if you had 1 minute to encourage them?
Yeah. So, depending on your place in life, it can be hard to find the time to sit down and write, but it can also be hard to find the time to sit down and pray. But if you can combine those things, I think you're going to find yourself just a more joyful person with a more joyful product, whatever the story is you're trying to tell. If you sit down and pray with it and meditate with it and really let that into the process, then whatever the story ends up being and communicating to others, I think it'll be more joyful for yourself and for them. So just include prayer into your writing.
I think that's a perfect place to end. Thanks so much for joining us today, Elizabeth. And go ahead, please hit like if you enjoy this. Check out Elizabeth's work. And till next time, keep writing.